Hello, and welcome to Marlins After Dark, because no team keeps you up late at night like the Miami Marlins. I'm your host, Sean Millerick, solo pod, doing it occasional Peter Pratt style tonight to try it out, to catch up on the past week of Marlins baseball. Come a long way since the first cycle in team history, which we talked about last week. Some big topics going on, and starting with the fact that the Marlins are playing winning baseball right now. This deep into April, 10-9 on the season, third in the National League East. Playoff odds of right around, got to hear 25% chance to make the playoffs according to Fangraphs. And with the schedule they've played so far, all the team, in fact, the Giants were the worst team that we've played, and the Giants aren't terrible. Still predicted to have a fairly positive season. You got to feel good about what the Marlins have been doing. 3 straight series wins, but they've kind of been so uneven series, right? So Marlins win first 2 out of 3 against the Diamondbacks, and then we have a Sandy loss. Marlins in the first 2 out of 3 against the Giants, and then we have the masterclass in an offensive ineptitude that the team put on yesterday. 2 for 16 with runners in scoring position. Painful loss after getting such a great effort out of the bullpen too. 7 scoreless innings from the pen, and then just couldn't get that extra run across. 1-1 until the 11th, and then ends up being a 5-2 result. And it's weird, right? It kind of sucks a little bit of the wind out when the series ends that way. But still, it's a series win. And it's 3 series wins in a row. That's not something the Marlins have done that often in the last couple of years. So you love to see that. But it's just kind of seemed like it's been that with most of the series. This year, either they get their teeth kicked in game 1, and then kind of tend to claw back the rest of the series, or like these last 2, that flat feeling. Good news, just the Marlins are good in middle games of series. So I guess that's good news for Sandy on Saturday. 5-1 in game 2. The Marlins are of series, the middle game of series this year. They're 2-0 and they win game 1. So a lot of attention to see what we do tomorrow night. It could end up being huge in this series, and not because of that random stat, and also just you got to like the other pitching matchups for the weekend. If they can steal a win on Friday, then going to feel pretty confident. But just kind of thought that was odd. But of course, the big story with the series yesterday, and that first against the Diamondbacks, when that series fell apart. All right, well, going up against Zach Gallen, how bad can you feel about Sandy Alcantara losing that game? And he's earned all the credit in the world. We're not going to do the what's wrong with Sandy thing. I'm going to need to see 2-3 more clinkers before I start to feel worried about it, assuming there isn't any kind of statistical explanation for it other than just crap luck. But yesterday, of course, Trevor goes down. And we've been talking so much about how excited we are about the rotation, how it's starting to come together, how it's starting to click, and then you pull Trevor Rogers out of it. I was about to say on the IL, but he's not on the IL yet, is he? Diagnosed with a forearm strain, which you hear that. Are we going to see him again before it's fall 2024? Or are we going to see him again before Mother's Day? But it's all on the table at this point. But you have to assume that there's going to be at least a IL stunt that we're going to look at. We're looking at least a 15-game mess at some point. And so what are they going to do about that? Had a couple of potential answers come up tonight. Brian Hoeing went in Jacksonville, 5 innings pitched, 7 strikeouts. Same night that Yuri Perez for Pensacola, 5-inning pitch, 5 strikeouts for him. One of those would be a serious knee-jerk reaction. Hope they would not be crazy enough to call up Yuri this early. But Brian Hoeing, that seems like the most likely move. Now, has he made it past the 5th inning this season in AAA? No. There was this Still, though, brought a 2.92 ERA into tonight and had a pretty solid appearance. So that seems like the move. Season long, though, then it gets loaded. And you wonder how they're going to try to maneuver this the next couple of weeks. They're just entering a 10-game stretch now without an off day starting tomorrow, longest such stretch of the season, where they're going to need to keep turning pitchers out there. So they definitely need a fifth starter. Curiously enough, when Cueto went down, there was just the way the off days worked. There was a stretch where they didn't need a fifth starter, and they chose to, and by all appearances correctly, chose to put Braxton Garrett back into the rotation. He looked great there last season. But really, you can only do that with one. Castanos, the other kind of next man up guy for that role, but he's on the minor league IL right now. So they definitely need someone on April 25th. Looking ahead in the schedule, the next few turns before the next time, it'd be easy to kind of cheat your way through it like the team has in the past, doing a bullpen day, just skipping a turn in the rotation. So they're going to need 2 starts, need 2 appearances by some other arms if they're in this 10-game stretch, like I said. April 25th, they're going to need someone, and that's probably going to be Brian Hoeing, but we'll see. Chichi Gonzalez is another option that's been thrown out. They could just say F it and put Devin Smeltzer in there, I suppose. If the rotation reels off 4 quality starts between now and then maybe they do a bullpen day, but you feel pretty confident they're going to bring someone in. April 30th, next day they'd be scheduled to need a fifth starter, but that's right before an off day. So that day looks much more promising than halfway through a series against the Braves to just burn the bullpen. And just as we just saw yesterday that the bullpen is capable of rattling off a bunch of quality innings in a row. So while you don't want to have to rely on that, especially early in the season, I can kind of see them doing that. Because just as today was an off day and yesterday they had to use everyone, it's kind of the same deal. And then May 6th would be the next time around. But even then we start getting into off days appearing on the schedule again. And after May 6th, then that's totally workable. There's about, I think, a 5-day stretch where they have an off day on either side of a series after that. So there's some flexibility. It's really just the next 2 days that they're definitely going to need a long relief option called up, if not an outright fifth starter. And then they have some room to maneuver around it. And who knows what will be going on by then. A couple more starts in the minors for some of the bigger names. But they've got some options, but going forward in the next few weeks, but probably not that many to choose from next week against Atlanta. Then, of course, there is the bargain bin option that's been kicked around popularly on Twitter today, and that is, what about Madison Bumgarner? Cut by kind of when we've been kicking around ways to get a player we're going to talk about in a minute off the roster. One of the matching one bad contract for another, Bumgarner's a name that's popularly come up. Bumgarner was kind of lit up by the Marlins last weekend, was lit up again yesterday. Diamondbacks decided they had enough. Diamondbacks, similar team to the Marlins. Team that's probably their ceilings looking at third place, but they have aspirations to be better this season, and they decided that they couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't shoot themselves in the foot, couldn't hamstring themselves by starting a player that was that counterproductive, that obviously worse than many other options they had to call up on the roster. And they cut him, and full kudos to the Diamondbacks for doing it. Had me flashing back a few years ago in Marlins history, well, more than a few years ago. Now, one of the proudest moments I had during the entire Jeffrey Loria era of ownership is when a few weeks into the season, the Marlins realized a few weeks into 2015 that Jared Saltalamacchia was terrible, was washed, was hurting the team, and that they had a better player who could take over that starter's role and turn things over to JT Realmuto. And while the Marlins do not have that caliber of a replacement for Garcia, at least on the surface, they're getting to the point where that would be great if they return serve and match the Diamondbacks' willingness to cut bait with a counterproductive player. But going back to Bumgarner for a second, then is he a possible fit? Once he clears waivers, once the Marlins don't have to be on the hook for that salary, and that still is a possibility that maybe if for some reason the Diamondbacks decide that what they really need is a fourth outfielder that can't hit his weight, then hey, maybe they'll take him on. But just he's been struggling of late. If we go back to what he did in this series where and in the game yesterday where the Marlins went 2 for 16 in runners in scoring position, which is pretty bad. Definitely yesterday, and Avisel Garcia over the course of this series, 1 for 8 with 6 strikeouts, 1 for 5 in the finale. If we were to dole out announce who wins this yesterday's winner for the Crash Davis Award for who couldn't hit water, they fell out of a freaking boat. It'd be Avisel. And so you'd love to see them move on from him. But I don't really see the Diamondbacks doing that. So I think the Marlins are going to have to wait this out. And along with many other major league teams are probably curious to try their luck with fixing Bumgarner. Marlins have one of the best pitching coaches in baseball. We know the Marlins have the best pitching coach in baseball in Mel Stoudemire Jr. So be kind of curious to see how this plays out for Bumgarner, who there's much has been written since he's been cut of what a kind of a cancer, what a gem he's been in the clubhouse, and that's obviously something to consider. But at the end of the day, this is a man who's won a ring, multiple rings, so he doesn't necessarily need to chase a championship. I imagine he's quite wealthy, so he doesn't necessarily have to sign with the first club to offer him a job. You could easily see him being tempted to wait this out until a World Series contender has an injury in their rotation for a month, and then say he'll do a tryout. But if he just wants to play, if he wants to get right back out there and hope to have a strong season, turn it around, earn himself one more contract, then maybe he does take an offer to just get guaranteed playing time. And with Cueto out, with Rogers out, and if it turns out in the next couple of days that we hear that Rogers is going to be out for a significant time, then maybe the Marlins are appealing. Personally, I kind of think that other teams are going to be willing to bet on their pitching coach and their coaches, and one of those teams is going to have deeper pockets. While the Marlins, it makes sense for the Marlins to get Bumgarner on the veterans minimum, some team's going to be willing to give him $2 million to do the same thing, and be willing to burn it. But getting back to the idea of Avi and the Marlins trying to do a Diamondbacks type move to get him off the roster, it's really coming time for the Marlins to make a decision on one of the problematic bats, I think, on their roster. We've got Avisel Garcia, who has this big contract, all this money attached, bitter pill to swallow to move on from a player like that. And then Jesus Sanchez, who has no options remaining, all this potential in the world, so lots of hemming and hawing about if once the Marlins let him go, of course, some team's going to pick him up and turn him into a 30, 40 homer gem. And it's a little bit of a sad mentality. I mean, I think you've got to acknowledge that he's been given every shot in the world at this point to make it on the MLB roster, and Sanchez has not shown that he can be a major league starter or necessarily a major league regular or contributor. And Avi, though, he's hitting 156 right now. That's pretty inexcusable. Again, for a Marlins team that is winning, that is third in their division, that is being competitive, that has made every attempt to be competitive this season, to take that next step, to have a winning record, to contend for a spot in the postseason. These games count right now in April, and if they want to say that they need to give Jesus Sanchez every chance, if they need to give him another month to try to catch fire, fine. If they want to say that Avisel Garcia has too much money attached to him and they need to try to get something out of the contract, need to turn him around, get him on some kind of tear so they can at least hope to flip him for some other bad deal, or just start getting what they were promised. Jorge Soler's turned things around from last year. Maybe Avi's just a slow starter, and he can do the same thing, and it'll be Mayflowers for him after all the April showers. But I don't think they could afford to wait much longer or have both of them on the roster. You can burn one roster spot on a project like that. You can't burn two. And the Marlins have to make a call soon, I think in the next week, on which of these guys is getting chopped, DFA'd, and who's making room for Peyton Burdick or anyone else. Burdick with 8 home runs now and at AAA, that's seeming like the most likely guy to call up next. But anything would be better. Burdick, even if Burdick completely reverts to what he did last year, he had 207 last season in his cup of coffee. Showed some real questions about last year if he could stick on an MLB roster. That's nearly 50 points better than Avisail Garcia is doing right now. So it's time for them to cut bait on one of them. That would be really interesting to see in the next week or two. I hope it's just the next week or two who that's going to be. But okay. And lastly, so let's just kind of talk Cleveland. And I guess I'll just share my expectations for the Cleveland series coming up. I think this is going to be really tight going into it. So any series where the Marlins have their 2 best starting pitchers going, and Sandy Alcantara and Jesus Luzardo, you feel excited. You have to think that you have every chance to win that series. Now, this is on the road. The Marlins won't have the benefit of wearing teal for one of the games. So there's some concerns there. Cleveland, definitely some things that they stand out at. They lead heading into tonight. They lead baseball in stolen bases. They're in the top 5 in walks. They're in the bottom 5 in strikeouts. So very, very sound hitting team, solid pitching, just like the Marlins. They're kind of who the Marlins aspire to be. A team with about 1 star and a solid roster, built around with pitching as its backbone. It's not spending a ton of money, and hoping to get the most mileage possible out of that. Cleveland, in terms of, they do have a negative run differential, same as the Marlins. It's not Marlins bad in terms of run differential. Marlins still, they've been improving a little bit of late, still near the bottom of the barrel in that. They're in the bottom 10 of the league in run differential, and they're the only team in that bottom 10, one of only 2 teams in that bottom 10 that actually has a winning record. It's them and the Blue Jays. So while on the one hand, it's not sustainable what the Marlins are doing. Anytime you click Pythagorean projection for the Marlins, you're going to start crying over what their record should actually look like. But on the other hand, the other one of those teams, again, is the Blue Jays. And 2 of the teams in that bottom 10 right now are the Phillies and the Blue Jays, in addition to the Marlins, 2 teams that you expect to make the playoffs, and have winning records and to turn things around in a hurry. Marlins could certainly do the same thing. Again, so Indian series predictions. One thing I hate about this series is that Sandy is matched up against another Ace. And while definitely strength versus strength, can be a good thing, in a series where you only want to win, your goal is just winning 2 out of 3. I'd feel much better if I needed to count on Sandy beating Zach Plesac than Sandy having to, hold the Guardians, to effectively 1 run or less while Shane Bieber throttles the Marlins on Saturday. But then again, I told you we're 5-1 in the middle games of the series, so it's always that. And then Luzardo running out on Sunday. I think it's really, I think the team that wins tomorrow will win the series. And that concerns me a little bit because, if you look at tomorrow's starter for the Indians, Guardians, geez. I watched Major League earlier this week. I think it's just stuck in my head that the Guardians starter, Zach Plesac, has an ERA over 6 coming into the game, but I would caution you that's pretty misleading. 6 ERA, he's actually averaged a quality start his last 2 times out. One one appearance, he went 7 innings. The other one, he went 5, 2 earned runs in each of them. So he's, kind of starting to come on strong, but he's been pretty inconsistent the last couple of years. So I like Miami's chances tomorrow, and then I do like Miami's chances to split one of the two with Sandy and Jesus on the hill. So I think the Marlins are going to win 2 out of 3. I do think there'll be, but I do expect there to be at least a couple moments that really are galling for Marlins fans, most especially Josh Naylor. My biggest prediction for this series would be that at some point Josh Naylor gets a big hit and acts like an ass while doing it, and Marlins Twitter will burn down as a result. So I've penciled that in for sure, but beyond that, I do think the Marlins win 2 out of 3. But this is going to be a tight series. Cleveland is 6-6 in 1-run games, or 4-0 in extra innings. Of course, the Marlins are 5-0 in 1-run games, so should be advantage Marlins there. But AJ Puk has been great. Cleveland has probably the best closer in baseball in Emmanuel Clase, and that's so if it goes late, then that's going to be dicey. But Marlins take 2 out of 3. Then the last thing, in past episodes, I've done a Marlins top 30 broadcast. I've put a pause on those. I'll start doing those again next week. But rather than reflecting on the next couple of names up on my list for that, one of whom played for the 97 Marlins, if we're playing a series against Cleveland in an anniversary season, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the first time the Marlins played in Cleveland, and drew attention to the fact that they did win 2 out of 3 in Jacobs Field in the 1997 World Series. Really, the standout game from that stretch was the third game in that series, when the Marlins won a game 14-11, tied 7-7, 7-7 all going into the 9th inning. A game that, if you look at his later work, kind of brought Bob Costas to tears about the state of division races and the introduction of the wild card in baseball. An 11-run 9th inning, followed, and then the Marlins ended up winning that game 14-11. But it's not that 9th inning, not a thing of beauty, and a couple ugly 9th innings in that whole series actually. But so the Marlins have done it before in Cleveland, and hoping they do it this weekend. But all right, that's all I got for tonight, and I'm going to start trying to do this show regularly again. You're interested in following my work, I've got an article up today on Call of the Pen. You can find my work there. I treat everything out from my account at Miami Sports Minute, and I'll hope to catch you next week. Feel free to holler at me on Twitter if there's anything you'd like to see in the show, something I could add. I'm playing with this format all summer and interested in constructive criticism. And if it's not constructive, then, well, I guess I can always block you. Or I'll retweet it if it's funny. Anyway, have a good night, and I'll catch you next time on Marlins After Dark. Go Fish.